The alarms aboard the Veyton deep cruiser Ashen Verity did not scream. They sang. A long, low chord in 3 notes, the way grief sings in a language that does not believe in panic. I had been on that ship for 11 months as the only human engineer cleared past the reactor bulkhead, and in all that time I had never heard those 3 notes together. When I did, I knew before anyone told me that the core was dying. I was in the galley when it started, watching my daughter eat. Myra was 5 years old and had a way of holding a spoon like it was a delicate instrument she had been entrusted with by a museum. She was chasing a square of pale Veyton fruit around the bowl, frowning at it the way she frowned at puzzles, and she did not look up when the chord began. She only said very softly, "Daddy, the ship is humming wrong." I remember that. I remember the exact pitch of her voice. I remember the way the overhead lights shifted from their usual warm amber to a colder white that the Veyton use when something has gone past correction. I remember setting down my cup of tea so carefully that not a drop spilled, because some animal part of me already understood that this was a moment I would replay for the rest of my life, and I did not want to remember it as the moment I made a mess. Then the comm in my ear came alive and Chief Engineer Solon Vassar said, in the flat, half-singing Veyton register that meant absolute emergency, "Engineer Hollies to the core. Now, bring nothing." I told my daughter to stay in the galley. I told her not to move. She nodded the way children nod when they know an adult is frightened and are trying to be brave about it. I touched the top of her head once, the soft place where her dark hair parted, and I went. The corridors of the Ashen Verity are 11 meters tall and built for a species that walks on 4 legs and reaches with 2 more. I ran them the way a mouse runs a cathedral. The reactor was 9 decks down and 3 sections aft, and by the time I reached the inner bulkhead my lungs were burning and my coveralls were wet through. The bulkhead door opened for me without a verbal pass. That was the second sign. Veyton doors always demand the pass. This one had decided there was no time. Inside the reactor antechamber, the air tasted of ozone and something sweeter, something almost floral, which was the smell of Stage 3 radiolytic decay venting through the secondaries. Solon Vassar stood at the diagnostic plinth with all 4 of her working arms folded against her thorax. Her crest, which I had only ever seen flushed the pale blue of professional calm, was the color of bruised iron. "Tell me," I said. "Containment lattice has begun to slip," she said. Her translator made it sound nearly conversational, but I had been with the Veyton long enough to hear the tremor in her underthroat. 3 of the 7 primary control rods have walked out of seat. The autoloaders cannot reseat them. The autoloaders are slag. Slag how? A micrometeor struck the outer hull 18 minutes ago in a region that should have been impossible to strike. It punched through a service trunk that should have been impossible to punch through. The shrapnel entered the reactor maintenance access at an angle that should have been impossible to achieve. She tipped her head, an almost human gesture she had picked up from me. "When 3 impossibles align, engineer, what does your species say?" "We say we're having a bad day." She made the soft, chuffing sound that was her laughter, and it broke in the middle. "Yes, we are having a bad day." I moved to the plinth. The schematic floated above it, half in Veyton glyphs and half translated into the English I had taught the ship's computer over many sleepless nights. The reactor core was a roughly spherical mass of caged plasma at the center of a triple-walled containment lattice. 7 control rods threaded into it from above. 3 of those rods had drifted out of alignment by a fraction of a degree each. A fraction was enough. The lattice was warping slowly, in a way that would not stop until either it was corrected or it failed catastrophically and took most of the lower decks with it. The plinth gave me a number, 26 minutes. "You evacuate the lower decks now," I said. "We have, they are sealed. The lower decks contain the only access to the lattice." "Then you open them." "To open them is to vent the core." "Then you cut a new access." "We cannot cut faster than 26 minutes through that alloy. We designed it that way. We were proud of it. She made the chuffing sound again, with no laughter at all this time. We were so proud of it. I looked at the schematic. I looked at the maintenance crawlway that led from the antechamber to the lattice. It was a perfectly cylindrical bore, polished, elegant, sized for a Veyton service drone, 1.25 meters wide at its widest point, narrowing in 3 places to 90 centimeters where it threaded between the secondary coolant manifolds. I looked at my own shoulders, which were broader than that, and at Solon Vassar's, which were 3 times broader than mine. I looked at the maintenance drones standing inert and useless in their cradles, 2 of them gutted by the same shrapnel that had killed the autoloaders. I did not say anything for a long time. Solon Vassar said, "Engineer Hollies." "Don't. Engineer. Don't say it, please. We have run the dimensional calculation 40 times. There is no adult of any species aboard this vessel who can pass the 3rd narrow. There is one person aboard who can. We need your permission. We will not ask her without it." I felt something in my chest fold up small. There is a particular silence that fills a room when a thing too large to say is sitting in it, and the Veyton, for all their differences, know that silence in the same way we do. Solon Vassar did not move. The autoloader cradles ticked softly as they cooled. Somewhere above us, the 3-note chord went on, patient as a held breath. "Show me," I said. She did. She brought up the simulation of a 5-year-old human child against the crawlway profile. She marked the 3 narrows. She marked where Myra would have to turn her head sideways, where she would have to exhale to pass the 2nd pinch, where her shoulders would touch the walls at the 3rd and she would have to push through with her toes. She marked the radiation gradient. At the rod heads, with the shielding intact, a child in a properly modified emergency suit could survive 19 minutes. Myra, working calmly, could reseat all 3 rods in 11. "There is also," Solon Vassar said, "the question of whether a child of 5 years can be taught to do this." I almost laughed. "You don't know my daughter." "No," she said. "I have only watched her from a respectful distance, as is our custom with the young of guests. I have seen her build." "Build what?" "Whatever she can. She found a discarded cable spool last cycle and made a tower of it on the observation deck. She found, I believe, a number of small magnetic pieces in your quarters and assembled them into a structure that the duty officer photographed and forwarded to me because she was uncertain what it depicted." Solon Vassar's crest shifted a half-shade lighter. "It depicted a reactor, engineer. A toy reactor. Your daughter had built a toy reactor on the floor of your quarters." "She likes my work." "Yes, she likes your work." I closed my eyes. I thought about the way Myra held a spoon. I thought about the way she had said, "The ship is humming wrong," before any of us had told her anything. I thought about the small, serious face she made when she was solving something, the way her tongue went into the corner of her mouth, the way she did not give up on a puzzle until it was done. I thought about her mother, who had died on a colony world 4 years ago in a fire that I had not been there to fight, and about how I had promised over her grave that I would never let anything take our daughter from me. I opened my eyes. "You will tell me everything," I said. "Every step. You will let me speak to her the whole time. If she wants to come out, she comes out. We try once. If she falters, we evacuate the rest of the ship in escape pods and we go down with the core." "Agreed." "And you will not lie to her." Solon Vassar looked at me with the long, slow blink that was the Veyton equivalent of placing a hand over a heart. "Engineer Hollies," she said, "we do not lie to children. It is the one thing my people and yours have always agreed on." I went to get my daughter. She was still in the galley. She had finished her fruit and arranged the empty bowl exactly in the center of the table, the spoon laid across it like a little bridge. She was watching the door. When I came in, she stood up without being asked. "The ship is still humming wrong," she said. "I know, baby. Are you going to fix it?" I crouched in front of her and took her small hands in mine. They were warm and slightly sticky from the fruit. I tried to think of every right way to say what I had to say and discovered that there was not one. So I told her the truth, which was the only thing I had left. "Myra," I said, "the ship is sick. There's a place inside it where it's hurting, and we need to push 3 little pieces back where they belong, or the ship will die and everyone on it will die too. The grown-ups are too big to fit. You are the only person on this ship who can fit. Aunt Solon and I will be talking to you in your ear the whole time, and we will tell you exactly what to do, and you can stop and come home any time you want. But I am asking you, baby. I am asking you to be very brave for me. Do you understand?" She thought about it. She thought about it for a long time, the way she thought about her puzzles, with her tongue in the corner of her mouth. I watched her face and I did not breathe. "Will you be there?" she said. "In your ear the whole time." "And my ear isn't here." "I know it isn't. I'm sorry." "I'm so sorry, baby." She looked at the wall behind me. She looked at the door. She looked at the bowl with the spoon laid across it like a bridge. Then she looked back at me with eyes that were too steady for a child of 5 and said, very simply, "Okay, Daddy, I'll fix it." I have lived through a great many moments in my life. I have buried a wife. I have stood in the cargo bay of a freighter that lost atmosphere and watched 2 men I knew die in front of me because their suits were the wrong color and the rescue drones could not see them in the dark. I have been 3 meters from a hull rupture and felt the cold come from my lungs. None of those moments did what the next 10 minutes did to me. None. The Vaten keep a small inventory of emergency suits sized for human guests. They had been designed for adults. The suit techs cut one down on the floor of the antechamber while I watched, working with shears that sang against the fabric and with a speed that I have never seen in any species before or since. They made a suit for Myra in 7 minutes. They printed a helmet for her in 3. They glued reflective tape along the sleeves and the boots because, as the tech said quietly, children must be visible. Children must always be visible. They printed her a chest plate with a little embossed shape on it that I did not recognize until she put it on, and I realized they had given her the Vaten glyph for honored elder, which they do not give lightly, and which they had never given to any human before. Solon Vassar knelt down, and a Vaten kneeling is an event in itself, a great folding of limbs that takes several seconds and which they reserve for moments of deep ceremony. She knelt to my daughter, who was now suited and looked very small inside all that white fabric, and she said, "Myra Hollies, you are going to go down a long tube. At the end of the tube there is a room with 3 handles. You will push each handle until it clicks. Then you will come home. Do you have any questions for me?" Myra looked up at her. Solon Vassar was nearly 4 meters tall, even kneeling. Myra reached up and very gently patted Solon's lower jaw, the way she patted my face when she wanted to comfort me. "Aunt Solon," she said, "is the ship going to be okay?" "Yes, child. Because of you, it will." "Okay." She turned to me. I picked her up. I held her against my chest for what was certainly not long enough and felt the small shape of her ribs through the suit, the rapid bird-quick beat of her heart, the warmth of her cheek against the side of my neck. I smelled the top of her head one more time. Her hair smelled like the cheap pear-scented shampoo I had bought in bulk on the last station, the kind she had picked herself because she liked the cartoon on the bottle. "I love you," I said. "I love you more than anything that has ever been. I love you, Daddy. You're going to do great." "I know." I put her down. The tech sealed her helmet. Her voice came through the comm in my ear, small and slightly tinny, exactly as it sounded when she was on the other side of the bathroom door brushing her teeth, and that was the thing that almost broke me, the ordinariness of it. The way the technology rendered my daughter into a sound I had heard 1,000 times in 1,000 domestic moments. A sound that meant brushing teeth and bedtime stories, and her asking through the door for one more glass of water. "Daddy, I'm in. I see you, baby. I see you on the screen. Can you see the light at the end?" "Yes." "Walk to it slow and steady. You don't have to hurry." She walked. She crawled in the narrow places. She did exactly what she was told, and she hummed, the way she always hummed when she was concentrating, a tuneless little melody she had inherited from her mother, and which I had not heard in 4 years from anyone but her. The sound of it through the calm, threaded over the soft pulse of the Vaton alarm cord and the wheeze of her child-sized respirator, undid something in me. I gripped the edge of the diagnostic plinth so hard that one of my fingernails split. Solon Vassar saw it. She said nothing. She placed one of her 4 working hands over mine and let it rest there, warm and 3-fingered and impossibly gentle, and we stood like that and watched my daughter go into the fire. For the first 10 meters the crawlway was wide enough for her to walk upright, and Myra walked it with the careful balanced gait she used on the painted lines of station concourses, putting one boot directly in front of the other. The wrist camera bobbed with her steps. The lights inside the tube were the cold white of the alarm cord, and they did unkind things to the small frosted visor of her helmet, glinting back the outline of her face in ways that made her look, on the monitor, like a ghost of herself. I had to look at the secondary monitor, the one that showed her vitals as steady green lines, to remember she was still the child I had carried into the antechamber. Solon Vassar's officers had already routed every available sensor on the ship to the diagnostic plinth, and the plinth, beneath the schematic, had quietly arranged a small grid of feeds: pulse, respiration, helmet temperature, suit pressure, dose accumulation, ambient sound. The ambient sound feed was the one I could not stop watching. It rendered Myra's small humming as a thin yellow waveform that rose and fell with her breath. And as long as the waveform moved, I knew she was alive in the world, and not yet a thing I would have to grieve. "Daddy," she said at 12 meters, "there's writing on the wall in here." "There is. That's the Vaton way of telling the maintenance drones where they are. You don't have to read it, baby. Just walk. It's pretty. Aunt Solon says thank you." Solon Vassar, beside me, said softly into her own calm, "It is meant to be pretty, child. We believed that even the parts of the ship no one would see should be made well. We were trying to be a people whose hidden places were as careful as our visible ones." "That's a nice thing to try to be," Myra said. Solon Vassar did not answer. I felt her hand, where it still rested on mine, tremble for the first time. The first narrow came at 16 meters. The crawlway dipped and turned. The pinch was 85 centimeters at its tightest, set between 2 pipes that carried the secondary coolant. Myra approached it the way she approached the gap behind the couch where her toys liked to roll. She lay down on her belly without being told, looked through, and then looked at the camera on her wrist mount and said, "I'm going to wiggle now, Daddy." "You wiggle, baby." My toy bear had to wiggle through the chair legs once. I remember that bear. "I'm going to pretend I'm the bear." She wiggled through. On the other side she stopped and tapped her wrist camera twice, which was the signal she had invented at age 3 to mean she had done a thing she was proud of. I told her I was proud of her. Solon Vassar, beside me, said into her own calm and careful clear English, "Myra, I am proud of you also." "The whole ship is proud of you." Myra laughed a small bright sound and said, "Aunt Solon, the whole ship is loud." "Yes, child, the ship is very loud right now." "Tell it SHH." "I will tell it SHH after you fix it." "Okay." The second narrow was at 28 meters. It dropped vertically through 3/4 of a meter of cooling vanes and then leveled out again. Myra looked down it for a long time. Her breathing on the comm changed. I watched her small gloved hands grip the lip of the drop, and I felt the way she was thinking through it, and I almost spoke, and Solon Vassar's hand tightened on mine, and I did not speak. Myra said, "Daddy, it's like the slide at the park." "It is, baby, just like that slide." "That slide was scary the first time." "It was. And then you did it 8 times in a row, and we couldn't get you off." "Yeah. You don't have to do this one 8 times. You just have to do it once." "Okay." She turned around and lowered herself down feet first, the way I had taught her on the slide. She braced her boots against the far wall. She let go with one hand and then the other and slid down with a small controlled bump that her suit absorbed perfectly. At the bottom she said, "I did it." And then she said, "The slide is metal here, it's cold." And then she said, "Daddy, the ship is humming better in this part." That was the moment, I think, that Solon Vassar's people lost their composure. The control deck had been silent for a long time, every Vayton officer at their station watching the small white shape of my daughter on the monitors, and at her voice saying the ship was humming better in this part. Several of them made the soft, low whistle that is their species' equivalent of weeping with relief. The under-officer beside the navigation console pressed his forehead to the console. The medical officer turned her face away from the screens and back again, 3 times fast, and then steadied. Solon Vassar's crest, beside me, brightened by exactly 1 shade and held. "Engineer Hollies," she said very quietly, "your daughter is talking to the ship. She does that. It is helping. I know it is." I had no idea then whether I meant it. I would understand later. The third narrow was at 41 meters. It was the worst of them. It was the one where her shoulders touched the wall on both sides, and the only way through was to push with the toes of her boots against the rim and worm forward in tiny increments, breathing out at each push. The plinth showed her radiation dose accumulating. At her current pace, she would clear the narrow with 5.5 minutes of safe exposure left to do the work. She had to do the work in 11. There was no math in any of that math that worked. I said, "Myra, listen to me. When you get through this part, you're going to be in a room that has 3 big handles. You need to push each one until it clicks. Do you remember the marble run we built in the apartment last winter?" "Yes." "Do you remember how the marble had to go through 3 gates before it could come home?" "Yes." This is just like that, 3 gates. You push each one. The marble is the ship. You're sending the ship home. She was quiet for a moment. The comm carried the small wet sound of her breathing inside the helmet. "Daddy," she said, "am I the marble?" I had to look up at the ceiling. I had to look up at the ceiling for a count of 3. "No, baby, you're the kid building the run. I'm the marble. I'm waiting to come home." "Oh, okay, that's better." Yeah, I didn't want to be the marble." She started through the third narrow. She pushed with her toes. She breathed out. She pushed again. Halfway through she had to stop and rest. The radiation counter on the plinth ticked. I said nothing because there was nothing to say that would make her go faster, and the wrong word would make her go slower. She rested for 10 seconds. Then she said, "Okay, I'm doing it again." And she did. When she came out the other side, she was in the rod chamber. It was a small spherical room lined in the dull dark metal of the inner containment, lit only by the soft blue glow of the warped lattice through the access ports. The 3 rod heads stood in front of her, each about the size of her own torso, each canted slightly off true. They were warm. The plinth told me the ambient radiation in the chamber was at the upper edge of her suit's tolerance. The plinth also told me, by way of a small new icon I had not seen before, that the Vayton crew were collectively holding their breath. I do not know how the plinth knew that. It knew. "Daddy, I see them. There's 3 like you said." "Good girl, now look at the first one. There's a handle on the side." "I see it." "You're going to push it. It might be heavy." "Okay." She reached up. The handle was at her shoulder height. She put both her small gloved hands on it. She pushed. Nothing happened. Solon Vassar murmured beside me, "The handle is calibrated for adult Vayton strength." "I know. She will not be able to." "She will, watch." I had watched my daughter try to open jars. I had watched her try to drag furniture 3 times her weight across the apartment to make a fort. I had watched her try to lift her own toy chest, which she could not lift, and I had watched her, having failed to lift it, sit down beside it and consider it for a long, quiet minute, and then go fetch the long-handled wooden spoon from the kitchen and use it as a lever. I had watched her do that at age 3.5. I knew my daughter. Myra, I said, it's stuck. The handle is stuck. What does Daddy say about stuck things? Stuck things need a longer arm. That's right, baby. Look around the room. Is there anything in there that could be a longer arm? She turned. Her wrist camera turned with her. The chamber was nearly bare, but on the far wall was a maintenance hook, a slender Vaten tool used by the drones to manipulate components in tight spaces, sitting in its cradle. It was as long as Myra was tall. That stick, she said. Get the stick, baby. She got the stick. She walked back to the rod head. She slid the hook end of the maintenance pole through the handle ring. She braced her boots against the curved wall the way she braced them against the doorframe when she pulled her toy wagon up the step. She pulled. The handle moved, slowly at first, then it clicked. Through every comm channel on the Ashen Verity, the soft three-note chord of the alarm fell by a semitone. The whole ship sighed. I felt the deck plates ease beneath my feet. Solon Vassar's hand tightened on mine and then let go. One, Myra said. Daddy, that was one. That was one, baby. Two more. You're a marvel. You're the best engineer on this ship. I know. She moved to the second handle. She did it again. The pole, the brace, the pull, click. The cord fell another semitone. I had not realized I was crying until I tasted the salt at the corner of my mouth. Between the second and third handle she paused. She did not say why she had paused. I watched her on the monitor and I did not ask, because I had learned over 5 years of being her father that when Myra was thinking through something difficult she did not want to be interrupted, and that the kindest thing I could do was to be present without being loud. She set the maintenance pole down. She looked at the lattice through one of the access ports. The blue glow lit her visor from underneath. She tilted her head the way she tilted it when she was watching the fish in the tank at the station library. That particular angle of curious witness. Solon Vassar murmured beside me, "What is she doing?" "Looking at it." "At what?" "At the reactor. She's looking at the reactor, Solon. She's never seen one before." Solon Vassar was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Engineer, she is 5. "I know. She is 5, and she is in the rod chamber, and she is taking a moment to look at the reactor." "Yes." "My people," Solon said very softly, "would not have taken that moment." "Mine wouldn't either," I said. "Mine wouldn't either, Solon." "That's just her." On the monitor, Myra lifted one small gloved hand and waved at the reactor, the way she waved at the fish. And then she picked up the pole and turned to the third handle, and the radiation counter kept ticking, and she did what she did. She moved to the third handle. She set the pole, she braced. She slipped. It was nothing, really. Her left boot lost traction on the curved floor. The floor was warming faster than the suit's thermal feedback could compensate for, and she went down on one knee. The pole jarred out of the handle ring. It rang against the wall. She made a small sound, half surprise and half pain. The radiation counter ticked. "Myra," I said. My voice did not shake. I am proud still that my voice did not shake. "Myra, baby, are you okay?" A pause. A breath. I bonked my knee. "I know you did. I saw. Can you stand up?" "Yes." "Stand up for me, baby." She stood. She picked up the pole. She looked at the third handle. The radiation counter ticked. She had 3 minutes left of safe exposure. The plinth showed me, in cold, honest numbers, that 3 minutes was probably not enough for her to brace and pull from a fresh stance. And then my daughter, my 5-year-old daughter, did the thing that I will think about every day for the rest of my life. She did not brace against the wall. She put the pole down. She walked up to the rod head. She put her small gloved hands flat against it. She leaned her whole body against the rod, the way she leaned against me when she was tired, and she said, "I'm sorry, ship. I'm going to push you now. It's going to feel funny, but you have to go home." And she pushed. Not with her arms, not with the lever, with her whole small body, with her shoulder and her hip and her braced foot, the way a child pushes a stuck door, the way she had pushed her toy chest once when she was 3 and wanted it across the room. The rod head moved, not because she was stronger than the handle. She was not. The rod head moved because, in slipping, the lattice geometry had shifted by 1/100th of a degree, and her father's daughter had felt somehow, some way, through some inheritance I cannot account for, that this rod no longer needed to be turned. It needed to be nudged. It needed to be reminded which way home was. It clicked. The alarm cord on the Ashen Verity stopped. The silence that followed was the loudest thing I have ever heard. It rang in the bulkheads. It rang in my chest. Solon Vassar made a sound I had never heard from a Vaten, a long, low note that the translator could not translate and that I understood anyway. "Daddy," Myra said. Her voice was very small. "Daddy, the humming stopped. Did I break it?" "No, baby." I could not get the rest out for a moment. I had to swallow. "No, you fixed it. You fixed it perfectly. The ship isn't sick anymore." "Oh. Come home, Myra." "Okay." She came home. The trip back was slower because she was tired, and because the suit had used most of its filtration capacity and we were rationing her air. She crawled. She wiggled through the first narrow without the bear analogy because she was past needing it. At the second narrow, she had to be pulled up the vertical by a thin cable that the techs threaded down to her hand. She held the cable correctly, both hands, the way I had taught her on a climbing wall at a station 6 months ago. Halfway up the vertical she stopped and asked, in a very small voice, "Daddy, am I sick now?" I looked at Solon Vassar. Solon looked back at me steadily. The medical officer, listening on her own comm, said into both of our ears, "Tell her the truth." "You took some sickness, baby," I said. "Like a sunburn, but on the inside. The medics are going to give you medicine when you come out, and you might feel tired for a few days, and then you'll be okay. I promise. Do you trust me?" A pause. The cable swayed slightly in the camera feed. "Yeah. You're almost home." "Okay." She kept climbing. At the third narrow, the one at 16 meters that she had named the slide, she came back up it on her belly the way she had come down. The last 10 meters she crawled because her legs were shaking, and she had decided, without telling anyone, that crawling was safer than walking when your legs shook. I watched her decide that. I watched her make the small adult assessment of her own body, and I watched her act on it, and I understood for the first time in my life that my daughter was a person and would always have been a person, and that I had been raising someone, all this time, who was already there, who had been there from the beginning, who I had only ever been keeping company. She emerged from the crawlway hatch into the antechamber 62 minutes after she had entered it, and when the techs unsealed her helmet she said, "It was cold in there at the end." I picked her up. I held her so tight I was afraid I would break her. She was perfectly warm. She smelled like the pear shampoo and like the faint metallic tang of the suit and like sweat and like my daughter, my daughter, my daughter. The medical officer was already at my elbow with a hand on Myra's wrist, reading numbers I did not look at because I trusted the medical officer with my life and with my daughter's, and after a long minute she said, very softly, "She is within tolerance. She will be fine. The dose is recoverable." I did not say anything. I could not say anything. Myra said, "Into my neck, Daddy, can I have ice cream?" I laughed. I laughed, and the medical officer laughed in the soft three-toned way that the Vaten laugh, and Solon Vassar made the chuffing sound for the first time that day with the laughter all the way in it, and the under-officer at the navigation console, who had pressed his forehead to it in relief, looked up and made the chuffing sound too. There was no ice cream on the Ashen Verity. There had never been. The Vaten do not eat anything cold by design, they're physiology objects. "Baby," I said into her hair, We are going to get you all the ice cream, every flavor, I promise, the very next station. Okay. You can have it for breakfast. Okay. You can have it for dinner. Daddy, don't be silly. She fell asleep in my arms a few minutes later. I carried her to the medical bay. The medical officer set her in the small cot they had printed for her and connected the soft monitors, and Myra did not wake. I sat in the chair beside her cot and held one of her hands in both of mine. Solon Vassar came in eventually. She lowered herself to the floor beside the cot, not kneeling this time, but sitting, all four working arms folded against her thorax, in the long, slow, folding posture the Vaten use when they are keeping vigil with a sick or sleeping kinsman. She did not speak for a long time. Before she spoke, she did something I have not in all the years since told anyone about. She reached very slowly into the inner fold of her uniform and brought out a small flat object that I recognized, after a moment, as a Vaten keepsake stone, the polished river stones their people carry in remembrance of the dead. She held it in her lower hand and looked at it for a long while. I did not ask. The Vaten do not speak of their dead casually. Then she leaned forward and placed the stone, very gently, in the empty cradle of the monitor stand beside Myra's cot, not in Myra's hand, not where Myra would see it when she woke, but where Solon Vassar could see it and Myra could not. A private offering. An older Vaten ritual that I had read about once and never expected to witness. She left it there for the rest of the night. When she did speak, she said, "I owe your species an apology, engineer." "For what?" "For the assumption." "What assumption?" She turned her great gray head toward me. Her crest was the pale blue of professional calm again, but underneath it I could see the iron color it had been, and would be again, in dreams. "My people designed this reactor 1200 of our years ago," she said. "The crawlway is a feature, not an oversight. It exists because in the very earliest design we believed that no maintenance system would ever be as reliable as a Vaten hand. The drones were a concession to long voyages. The crawlway was the redundancy of the redundancy. And the size of the crawlway," her voice caught in a small Vaten way. "The size of the crawlway is set to the smallest of us, our young, our smallest subadults who, in the old longship days, were trained for it and ran the rods in shifts. We stopped that practice 400 of our years ago. It was barbaric, we decided. We were ashamed of it. We modernized." "All right." "When the impossibles aligned, engineer, I was prepared to lose this ship. I had given the order to begin the evacuation drills before I called you. I did not believe there was a person aboard this vessel who could fit. I had forgotten that there was a human child aboard. I had forgotten because when I considered the crew manifest, I did not count her as crew. I counted her as cargo, as your daughter, as something to be protected, not something that could act." She closed her eyes. "I have killed Vaten ships before, engineer. I have given the order. I have walked away. I was prepared to do so again. And it was your child, whom I had counted as nothing, who walked toward what I had been ready to walk away from, who walked toward it humming." I did not know what to say. I sat there with my daughter's small hand in mine and looked at the great gray creature on the floor beside her cot, and after a long while I said, "Solon." She wasn't walking toward it because she was brave, not the way you mean. She was walking toward it because I asked her to, because she trusted me. That's all it was. That's all bravery ever is in a child of 5. It's trust spent in the right place. Solon Vassar was quiet. Then she said, "Engineer, that is somehow worse." "Why?" "Because it means the bravery was not in her. The bravery was in the bond. And the bond is a thing that we, my people, have always observed in your kind and never quite understood. We have wondered for a long time why humans persist, why your small, fragile species refuses to fail. Why, when we drop you in the worst environments, the most hostile colonies, the most marginal stations, you do not die. You do not die because your children trust you, and because you keep that trust, and because, in the keeping of it, your children grow into people who run into reactors and push the marble home. It's not magic, we just love them. Engineer. She made the chuffing sound again, and there were no tears in it this time, only an old, weary, grateful peace. Engineer. That is magic. That is the magic. You simply do not know it because you live inside it. I held my daughter's hand. The monitors made their soft, small sounds. The ship hummed correctly around us. Somewhere 4 decks above, the under-officer of navigation had the helm and was bringing us back onto our course, and somewhere 2 decks below, the techs were already removing the slagged autoloaders and beginning the long work of rebuilding the system so that no child would ever have to run the rods again. I would help them. I had things to say about access. I had things to say about redundancy. I had things to say about how a maintenance crawlway should be designed so that an adult of any species aboard could fit through it. They would listen. After today, they would listen to everything I said. But that was tomorrow. Tonight Myra slept and the ship lived, and I sat in a chair beside her cot and watched her breathe. She woke once near the 3rd hour. The medical bay was dim. The monitors had been turned down to a whisper, and Solon Vassar had finally gone, her river stone still glinting in the cradle of the monitor stand. Myra opened her eyes and looked at the ceiling and then at me and said, with the matter-of-fact clarity that small children have in the middle of the night, "Daddy, I had a dream the ship was a marble run." "That wasn't a dream, baby." She thought about this for a long, sleepy moment. "Oh," she said, "did I do it right?" "You did it perfectly." "Good." She closed her eyes again. "Don't tell Aunt Solon I dreamed about her. She'll think I'm her friend." "I won't tell her, baby." "Okay." She fell asleep again. I sat in the chair and laughed silently because I could not laugh aloud without waking her, and the laughter shook me apart in a way that I had been needing for hours. And the medical officer, who must have been watching from her station on the other side of the curtain, made the soft, chuffing sound very quietly to herself, and I knew that we were going to be all right. In the morning, when Myra was strong enough to sit up, the senior staff of the Ashen Verity came to the medical bay in single file. They did not crowd. They did not speak loudly. Solon Vassar had given the order, I learned later, that no Vaten would address the child as a hero, because a child does not yet know what heroism costs, and we should not teach her the cost on the same day she paid it. Instead, each officer came in turn and presented Myra with something small and personal. A navigation pin, a worn pocket tool, a folded square of ceremonial cloth, a single dried leaf from a plant the chief medical officer kept in her quarters. They told her, each one in careful translated English, "Myra Hollies, the ship hummed wrong and you helped it. Thank you." Myra accepted each gift with the gravity of a 5-year-old who has been told, in advance, that she should accept each gift with gravity. She held each one in both hands for a count of 3 before laying it carefully in the basket on her lap. When the under-officer of navigation gave her his pocket tool, a battered thing he had carried for 40 years, which had been on 3 ships before this one, she said to him, quite clearly, "Thank you, sir, but this one is your special one." The under-officer made the chuffing sound and pressed his great gray forehead against the side of the cot and said, "Yes, child. That is why I am giving it to you." She kept the pocket tool. She still has it. It is in the drawer of her workbench at home, between a roll of solder and a small plastic figure of a cartoon bear. There is a thing I want to tell you, because I have thought about it for many years since that day, and I have come to believe it is the true thing about my species that the Vaten, for all their kindness and their honor and their 1,200 years of careful engineering, did not see until the day my daughter went down the crawlway. It is not that we are brave. The Vaten are brave. Their soldiers walk into fire that would shame ours, and their captains die at their posts in ways that I have never seen a human die, and their grief is a more honest grief than I have ever heard from a human throat. They are braver than we are. They have always been. It is not that we are clever. They are cleverer than we are. They built the Ashen Verity. We built, mostly. The cheap shampoo Myra liked, and the foldable wagon and the little plastic toys whose magnets I had taken from her drawer for a project, and which she had reclaimed and built into a model of my workplace because she missed me when I was at work. It is not that we are strong, we are not. What we are, and I say this as a man who has lived among aliens for a long time and seen many kinds of people do many kinds of impossible things, is that we teach our children that the world will ask them, one day, to be larger than they are. We tell them in 1,000 small ways. We make them help carry the groceries when they cannot quite carry the groceries. We let them try the lid of the jar before we open it. We hand them the wooden spoon and let them stir the pot even when it would be faster to do it ourselves. We build the marble run together on the floor of the apartment in the winter, and we let them place the gates. We let them push the stuck door. We let them be brave for the toy bear who has to wiggle through the chair legs. We are teaching them every small day that they are people who can do things. We are saying it without saying it. We are saying it when we hand them the spoon. We are saying it when we say, "You do it, you're good at this." And then one day the impossibles align and a ship hums wrong and we crouch down in front of our child and we say, "The ship is sick, and you are the only one who can fix it, and I am asking you, baby." And the child, who has been trained for this moment by 1,000 smaller moments she did not know were training, looks at us with steady eyes and says, "Okay, Daddy, I'll fix it." That is the human thing. It is not in the running of the rods. It is not in the slipping and the pushing and the click of the third handle. It is in the spoon. It is in the marble run. It is in the slide at the park that was scary the first time. It is in the cheap pear shampoo with the cartoon on the bottle that she picked because she liked it, and which we bought because she liked it, because we have learned, slowly, painfully, over the long generations, that the small choices our children make matter, that the small things they like are not small, that they are practice for the day when they will be asked to choose something very large. Solon Vassar understood this, eventually. The Vaten, in the years that followed, redesigned not only the Ashen Verities crawlway but every reactor crawlway in their fleet. They did this not because they had decided in the end to make ships that human children could service. They did this because they had decided in the end that no child of any species should ever again have to be the redundancy of the redundancy. They sent me a copy of the new schematic when it was finished, with a private note from Solon that said, in careful English, "Engineer Hollies, we have made the ship larger so that we do not have to make the child smaller. With respect and with shame, your friend, Solon Vassar." I framed that note. It hangs in the apartment where Myra and I live now, on the wall above the small workbench where she still, at 14, builds things. She is not going to be an engineer. She has decided that she wants to be a teacher. She told me this last year, with her tongue in the corner of her mouth, in the same serious tone she used when she told me, at 5, that she would fix the ship. "Why a teacher?" I asked her. "Because somebody taught me how to fix the ship," she said, "and nobody knows they're doing it when they do it. Somebody should know they're doing it." She does not remember most of the crawlway. She remembers the bear. She remembers the slide. She remembers the cold at the end and asking for ice cream. She does not remember the third handle. The medical officer told me, when we finally left the Ashen Verity, that this was a kindness of the brain, that the brain takes the worst of the rod chamber and folds it up and puts it somewhere a 5-year-old does not have to look. I have not corrected her memory. I have not told her about the slip, about the way she leaned her whole body against the rod and said, "I'm sorry, ship, I'm going to push you now." I have kept that for myself. What I have told her, what I will tell her again and again for the rest of my life, is that she is a person who can do things. That when the world asks her to be larger than she is, she will know how, because she has been practicing for it her whole life, and because I will be in her ear the way I was in her ear in the crawlway, whether or not I am still in the world by then. The Vaten have a saying that I learned in the years I spent with them, after the Ashen Verity, after Solon Vassar became my friend, and not only my colleague. They say it at the end of long voyages, when the ship has come safely into port and the crew is preparing to disembark. The translator renders it, imperfectly, as, "We were singled out by the void, and we did not go alone." I think about that saying often. I think the Vaten mean it one way and I mean it another. I think they mean that no crew is ever truly alone in the dark, that the bonds between them are what carry them home. I mean that too, but I also mean something else. I mean that on the day the Ashen Verity hummed wrong, my daughter was singled out. Singled out by the geometry of the crawlway, by the malice of three impossibles, by the simple cruel arithmetic of being the only person small enough. She was singled out, and she could have been alone in it, and she was not. She was not alone because her father was in her ear, because her mother, 4 years dead, was in the tuneless little melody she hummed, because the cheap pear shampoo was on her hair and the marble run was in her hands, and the toy bear was wiggling beside her through the chair legs of the secondary coolant manifolds. She was singled out, and she did not go alone, because we had been with her the whole small, ordinary while. That is the HFY of it if you want one. That is the thing we do. That is the magic we live inside and do not know we live inside. We make our children and we love them and we teach them how to push the door, and then when the void singles them out we go with them. Every time, without exception. Even when we cannot physically follow, especially then. The ship hums correctly. The chord, when I dream of it, is the resolved one. My daughter sleeps in the next room, 14 years old and dreaming of being a teacher, and somewhere out among the long-haul Vaten fleet, a crawlway has been widened so that a grown man could pass through it. And I am, on most days, an ordinary engineer in an ordinary apartment on an ordinary station, and I would not trade what I have for anything that has ever been or anything that will ever be. Solon Vassar visited us once, 2 years after the Ashen Verity. She came to our apartment on the station because she had been routed through on her way to a diplomatic posting, and she had asked, with a Vaten formality that came across in translation as nervousness, whether she might stop and pay her respects to the child she had once asked to push a marble home. I told her, of course. I told her to come for dinner. She came. She had to duck through our door. She filled the living room. Myra, who was 7 by then, and who remembered Solon only in the foggy way that small children remember the people who loomed in their lives during a single intense week, looked up at her from the floor where she had been building something out of plastic bricks and said, "You're tall." "I am," Solon agreed. "Do you want to see my castle?" "Very much." Solon lowered herself to the floor in the long folding way, and Myra walked her through the castle, pointing out the drawbridge and the moat and the small painted figure of a knight who, she explained, was named Knight. Solon asked questions. She asked them with the same gravity she had used to ask Myra about the handles. Myra answered with the same gravity she had used to push them. When dinner was over and Myra had gone to bed, she had insisted on showing Solon the cartoon bear from the shampoo bottle, which I had kept, and Solon had received it with the same ceremonial gravity as the under-officer's pocket tool. Solon and I sat on the small balcony of the apartment and looked at the station's slow-turning skyline. "Engineer," Solon said. "Solon, I came here for a reason." I assumed. "The new crawlways are finished fleet-wide. The retrofits are done. The redundancy of the redundancy has been formally retired. My people have made a small ceremony of it. We are not, as a culture, much given to ceremonies of correction, but we made one for this." She paused. "I wanted you to know that the ceremony has a name. We have called it in the old tongue Yellen Varte. The translator renders it badly. The closest in your language would be the apology to the small." "Solon, it is not only for your daughter. It is for all the small ones we did not count. The small Vaten of 400 years ago who ran the rods. The small of every species we have not yet met but might. We have written into the Master Engineering Charter the principle that no child shall be the redundancy of any system, that the system shall be redesigned, that the apology when we have erred shall be made publicly and the correction shall be made structurally. She turned her great gray head to me, the station lights caught in her crest. Your daughter changed our charter engineer. 5 years old with a maintenance pole in a chamber she should never have been in. She changed the charter of a fleet that has been at sail for 1,200 of our years. I did not say anything for a while. The station turned. Below us somewhere, a freighter was docking, and the soft 3-note chord of its arrival pinged through the bulkheads. A different chord than the one I dreamed about, a friendly one, a chord that meant a ship was home. She doesn't know she did that, I said. No, Solon said, she does not. I don't think I'll tell her. No. It might make her think she has to do it again, some other version of it. She might spend her life looking for the next reactor. I'd rather she just be a kid. I'd rather she build castles. Solon considered this for a long moment in the Vaten way, with her 4 arms folded, and her crest gone the soft blue of professional thought. Engineer, she said at last, that is the most human answer you have ever given me. Is it good or bad? It is good. I think it is good. I think your species has understood something about children that mine forgot, somewhere in our long history, and is only now relearning, which is that the things they do when they are small do not have to define them, that a child who pushes a marble home does not have to keep pushing marbles, that she is allowed to grow up into something other than her bravest act, that she is allowed, in fact, to forget her bravest act, and to be remembered by it only by those of us who love her. She finished her drink. She set the glass down with great care. The Vaten glasses are tall and narrow, and Solon's hand made them look like a thimble. I will go now, she said. I have a posting to make, engineer friend. She made the chuffing sound soft. Thank you for the dinner. For the castle, for the bear from the shampoo bottle, for the use, however brief, of your daughter's company. I will carry these things with me into the dark. Safe travels, Solon. And to you. She left. I sat on the balcony for a long while after she had gone, watching the station turn, listening to the friendly chords of arriving ships, thinking about the rod chamber and the marble run and the small, serious face my daughter made when she was solving something. The ship hums correctly. The chord, when I dream of it, is the resolved one. The marble is home.